At its peak, Motorola had invented the mobile phone. Not improved it, not popularized it, invented it. The company held the patent on the first handheld cellular device, the DynaTAC, which went on sale in 1983. For 2 decades after that, Motorola's name was synonymous with the idea of wireless communication itself. And yet by 2012, Google bought the entire company, its patents, its factories, its brand, its history for $12.5 billion and then sold what remained just 2 years later for $291 billion. That is not a stumble. That is an empire dissolving. The question worth asking is not simply what went wrong. The more precise question is, how does the company that built the mobile phone end up being sold for less than a quarter of what it was worth, twice in 2 years? The answer begins with what made Motorola remarkable in the first place. Founded in 1928 by brothers Paul and Joseph Galvin as Galvin Manufacturing Corporation, the company built its identity around radio technology, two-way radios, walkie-talkies, cellular infrastructure. It renamed itself Motorola in 1947, and it kept expanding into whatever wireless communication meant at any given decade. By 1983, that meant producing the DynaTAC, the first commercially available mobile handset. The device was enormous and expensive, but it established something more valuable than a product line. It established Motorola as the company that defined what a mobile phone was. Through the 1990s, that definition held. The MicroTAC made handsets smaller and more personal. The StarTAC, a clamshell design released in the mid-1990s, became a genuine cultural object, compact, recognizable, coveted. Motorola was not just selling hardware, it was selling the experience of being modern. Its cellular infrastructure division supplied the networks that competitors' phones ran on. Its semiconductor division powered devices across the industry. The company operated across the entire wireless ecosystem in a way that few rivals could match. But the breadth that made Motorola powerful also made it structurally slow. Running consumer handsets, radio communication systems, cable modems, set-top boxes, satellite communicators, pagers, and semiconductor operations inside a single corporation meant that no single division could move at the speed the market eventually demanded. Each unit had its own engineering culture, its own procurement, its own profit and loss logic. When the mobile phone market accelerated, Motorola had to negotiate that acceleration across an enormous internal bureaucracy. The structural weakness became visible in the late 1990s and early 2000s when Nokia and then Samsung began to erode Motorola's handset position with faster product cycles and sharper industrial design. Motorola's answer arrived in 2004 with the Razr V3, an ultra-thin clamshell that became one of the best-selling phones in history. At its peak, the Razr moved over 50 million units annually and restored Motorola to cultural relevance. It was elegant, it was aspirational, and it proved that Motorola could still build a product the world wanted to carry in its pocket. The problem was what the Razr revealed about how Motorola operated. The company's sources described the Razr era as a resurgence, but they also described the device as part of a pattern of one-hit wonders, moments of genuine product brilliance that were not backed by the organizational capacity to follow through. While the Razr dominated the mid-2000s, Apple was developing the iPhone and Google was building Android. Motorola had the engineering talent, the brand, and the distribution. What it did not have was a coherent software strategy for what came next. The iPhone launched in 2007. Android reached the market in 2008. Motorola's handset division had no comparable platform response, and the consequences were immediate and severe. The sources document that Motorola lost $4.3 billion between 2007 and 2009. That figure spans 3 years and covers the precise period when the smartphone transition redefined what a mobile phone was supposed to do. Motorola had invented the mobile phone. It did not invent the smartphone, and it could not buy time quickly enough to catch up. The company's response was to pivot hard toward Android. In 2009, Motorola released the Droid, a device built on Google's operating system and sold through Verizon in the United States. The Droid was a genuine competitive product, and it demonstrated that Motorola could execute on the new platform. But executing on someone else's platform is a fundamentally different strategic position than owning the defining device category. Motorola was now one Android manufacturer among several, competing on hardware differentiation, while Samsung, HTC, and LG were doing the same thing, each with comparable access to the same operating system. By 2011, the accumulated losses and the strategic incoherence forced a structural decision. Motorola split into 2 independent public companies on January 4, 2011. Motorola Solutions took the enterprise radio and communications businesses and became the legal successor to the original corporation. Motorola Mobility took the consumer handset business, the cable modems, and the set-top boxes. The split was a recognition that the original conglomerate structure had become an obstacle, but it also meant that Motorola Mobility launched as a standalone company carrying the weight of years of losses with no parent organization to absorb further shocks. Google's acquisition followed in May 2012 at $12.5 billion. The sources are direct about the primary intent. Google wanted Motorola Mobility's patent portfolio to protect other Android manufacturers from litigation. The patents, not the phone business, were the asset. Under Google's ownership, Motorola Mobility's cable and set-top operations were sold to Aris Group, and the product line shifted increasingly toward entry-level smartphones. Google also began developing Project Ara, an experimental modular phone concept, through an internal division called ATAP. But the core handset business did not recover its competitive position. In October 2014, Google sold Motorola Mobility to Lenovo for $2.91 billion. The sale excluded ATAP and the majority of the patents Google had originally acquired. What Lenovo received was the brand, the manufacturing operations, and what remained of the product line. Lenovo folded its own existing smartphone division into Motorola Mobility and continued operating under the Motorola name. The company today sells the Edge series, the Razr foldables, and the Moto G line, real products with real markets, but operating far from the position Motorola once held. The trajectory from $12.5 billion to $291 billion in under 3 years is a precise measurement of how much of the original acquisition price was patent value rather than business value. Motorola Mobility, stripped of most of its intellectual property, was worth roughly a quarter of what Google had paid. That gap is the clearest single number in this story. What the Motorola collapse actually demonstrates is a specific organizational mechanism. A company can retain technical excellence and brand strength long after the structural conditions that made it dominant have changed, and that retention creates a false sense of security. Motorola had the engineering to build the Razr years after it had already lost the platform war. That capability felt like resilience. It was actually a lag, the visible output of an organization still running on accumulated momentum while its foundational advantage had already eroded beneath it. The mobile phone existed because Motorola built it. The smartphone existed because the industry moved on without Motorola leading it. Those two facts, separated by roughly 20 years, are the entire story. The company that defines a technology category does not automatically define what that category becomes next. And the distance between those two things is where empires end.